"All 7 of us are yours," said the beautiful daughter of his dead neighbor. The small dusty town of Cactus Ridge sat at the edge of a barren desert, with the sun setting in a fiery orange sky. The only sound that could be heard was the occasional whinny of a horse or the clatter of boots on the cracked dirt streets. Marshal Eli Rivers had lived in this town for over a decade, and the people knew him well. He was a quiet man, tall with a weathered face marked by the years of hard work and loss. Eli was the town's protector, though most days there wasn't much to protect it from. The lawlessness was a thing of the past, and the only trouble in Cactus Ridge came in the form of dust storms and the occasional wild animal. Yet despite the peacefulness, Eli always felt a nagging emptiness in his heart, a space left behind by the loss of his wife many years ago. He never spoke about her, and no one asked. They all understood. But there was one thing he couldn't ignore: the death of his neighbor, Jasper Ford. Jasper had been a peculiar man, a former scientist, an inventor, and someone who kept to himself. He'd moved to Cactus Ridge years ago after the town had already been settled, but his presence had always been different. He would work on strange machines that no one understood, muttering to himself about future worlds and inventions that seemed impossible. A few weeks ago, Jasper was found dead in his home. No one knew what happened. It wasn't a violent death, but something about it felt off. Eli had been the one to find him, alone and cold in his cluttered workshop. Jasper had no family, or at least none that Eli had ever seen. His only companion was his daughter, Leela, but she hadn't been around for years. Eli had no reason to think much of it until today. It was late in the afternoon when he first saw her. He was sitting on the porch of his small cabin, wiping his brow after a long day of checking the cattle. He hadn't heard the horse approaching, but when he turned, there she was. Lila Ford was a woman now, no longer the young girl who had once run through the fields behind Jasper's house. She had changed, and yet she still had the same grace, the same quiet beauty that Eli remembered from their childhood. Her eyes were the color of the desert sky just before dusk, deep and haunting. She was dressed differently, in a strange outfit that looked out of place for Cactus Ridge. It wasn't the clothing of a rancher or a traveler. It was something foreign, like something from another world. Lila stopped her horse in front of the porch and looked at Eli, her face unreadable. Eli stood slowly, unsure of what to say. It had been so many years since he'd seen her. He hadn't expected her to come back, not after all this time. "I'm sorry for your loss," Eli said, his voice rough, as he stepped off the porch and walked toward her. "I heard about your father." Leela nodded, her face a mixture of sorrow and determination. It wasn't just a loss. It was something more. "What do you mean?" Lila's eyes scanned the surroundings as if making sure no one was listening. She dismounted her horse and walked up to him, lowering her voice. "I need your help, Marshal Rivers," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "My father didn't die by chance. He was taken." Saya, a strange chill run down his spine. "Taken? What are you talking about?" Lila handed him a small metallic sphere, barely the size of a fist. It hummed with a soft vibrating energy that Eli could feel in the air around him. It was warm to the touch, almost like a living thing. "This was my father's work," she said. "He was involved in something much bigger than anyone realized. He had enemies who wanted this." She glanced around again as if worried someone might be watching them. "He was trying to protect it, but now they've killed him to get to it." Eli looked down at the sphere in his hand, feeling the weight of it, but not understanding what it was. "And what do you want me to do about it?" "I need you to help me," Lila said, her voice softening. "I can't do this alone. There are forces coming after me, after this, after everything. You knew my father. You owe him that much." Eli frowned, confused by her words. He had never been close to Jasper, and the thought of getting involved in something beyond his simple lawman duties didn't sit well with him. Yet there was something about Lila, something in her eyes, that made him hesitate. "I'm just a marshal," Eli said, his voice low. "I don't get involved in things like this." She just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then, almost as if she had made a decision, she spoke again, her words clear and heavy. "All 7 of us are yours," she said, her tone calm but resolute. Eli stared at her, unsure of what she meant. 7? Lila nodded slowly, almost too slowly. "One that your father knew about, even if he never told you. The 7 of us, my father and the others, are the key to something bigger than all of us. You'll understand soon. But right now, I need you. The people who killed my father. They're coming for me, and they'll stop at nothing to get what we have." Eli's mind raced. He was a man who had dealt with small-time thieves, drifters, and the occasional outlaw. But this felt different. It felt far bigger than anything he had ever faced. "You're asking me to risk my life for something I don't understand," Eli said, his voice skeptical but curious. Lila reached out and placed a hand on his arm, her grip firm but not harsh. "I'm asking you to protect what's left of this town, what's left of the people who have been forgotten. And I'm asking you to protect me because I'm the last of the 7. Ellie stared at her, and for the first time in a long while he felt something stir inside him. It was the same feeling he had when he first became Marshal, that deep-rooted sense of duty. Only this time, it was different. This time, there was a promise he couldn't ignore. "I don't know what's going on, Lila, but I'll help you. We'll figure this out together." Her face softened, a quiet relief washing over her. "Thank you," she whispered. "We don't have much time." As they stood there facing one another, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change, and he would be part of it, whether he was ready or not. The sun had set over Cactus Ridge, and the town was slowly sinking into a deep silence. Eli had just returned to his cabin after a long day, his mind swirling with thoughts about Lila and the strange device she had given him. The whole encounter felt surreal, like something from one of the stories he used to hear as a boy, a tale of adventure, mystery, and things he didn't understand. But this wasn't a story. This was real. He sat at his wooden table, the small metallic sphere Lila had given him resting in front of him. The hum it emitted was barely audible, but there was something about it that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. It felt alive, as if it held a secret just out of reach. Eli had lived in Cactus Ridge for most of his life, and in all those years he had never encountered anything like this. There were strange things happening, things that didn't fit into his understanding of the world. But he couldn't shake the feeling that Lila had been telling the truth. Something big was coming, and he was being dragged into it whether he liked it or not. The next morning, Eli met with Lila at the same spot, just outside his cabin. She looked different today, more focused, as if she had made a decision about something. The urgency in her eyes hadn't gone away. If anything, it had grown stronger. "Marshal," she said without preamble, "we need to go to my father's workshop. There's something there that will help us understand what's happening." "You're asking me to go with you into that place again?" he said. "The place where your father died?" Lila's eyes softened. "I know it's hard, but we don't have a choice. My father left clues, things that will explain what's happening, but they're hidden. I need someone I can trust to help me find them." Eli hesitated for a moment before nodding. He didn't trust easily, but Lila had already shown him a side of her that made him believe she was telling the truth. He grabbed his hat from the table and followed her out to where her father's old workshop stood. It had been abandoned for weeks, but even now Eli could feel the strange energy around the place. The workshop was a rundown building on the outskirts of town filled with old machines, tools, and half-finished projects. The windows were dusty, and the door creaked as they stepped inside. It smelled of old oil, metal, and forgotten dreams. Lila walked toward a workbench near the back of the room, pushing aside old blueprints and broken pieces of equipment. "This is where it all began," she said, almost to herself. "My father was a brilliant inventor, but he got caught up in something bigger than any of us could have imagined." Eli followed her, his boots making a soft thud on the wooden floor. He looked around at the cluttered workshop, trying to make sense of it all. There were wires, gears, and strange devices scattered everywhere. It all seemed like a mess, but to Lila it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. Lila picked up a metal box from the workbench and held it out to Eli. "This is what we're looking for." Eli took the box from her hands. It was heavy and intricately designed, with strange symbols etched into its surface. He didn't understand what it meant, but he could feel its significance. There was something important inside, something that could change everything. "This is another one of my father's inventions," Lila explained. "He was working on something big, something that could help people across the galaxy. But there were others who didn't want that. They wanted control. That's why he had to hide it." Ellie opened the box carefully, his fingers brushing against the cool metal. Inside was a small glowing device, much like the sphere Lila had given him. But this one was different. It was a smooth, transparent crystal that pulsed with a soft blue light. It seemed to hum with energy, just like the sphere, but this one was more powerful, more intense. "What is it?" Eli asked, staring at the crystal in awe. "This is the key," Lila said, her voice low and steady. "My father's final invention. It's a part of something much larger, something that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. Eli's mind was racing. He had seen many things in his life, but nothing like this. The idea that a simple device could hold the power to change the course of history was beyond anything he had ever imagined. "Your father," Eli began, trying to make sense of it all. "He was involved in some kind of war? A war for control?" Leela nodded. "Yes, but it wasn't just a war between two sides. It was a war for the future. My father, along with a group of others, formed a resistance against an intergalactic corporation. They called themselves the Seven. They were trying to stop the corporation from taking over the galaxy, from controlling everything. But my father, he was the last one alive. The others are all gone." Eli stood there for a moment, trying to process what Lila had just told him. A resistance group? A war for the future? It all sounded like something out of a story, but Lila's serious expression told him she wasn't lying. "Where do we go from here?" Eli asked, looking at her. "How do we stop them?" Lila sighed, a look of determination crossing her face. "We have to find the remaining members of the Seven. They're scattered across the galaxy, in hiding, but they're still alive. And we need to find them before the corporation does." "That's a lot of people to find. How will we even know where to start?" "We start by going to the first person on my father's list, a former soldier who knows how to fight the corporation. He's in the mountains, far from here. It won't be easy, but we have to try." Eli nodded slowly. He didn't know what he was getting into, but something told him this wasn't a fight he could walk away from. There were too many lives at stake, too many people who needed help. The journey ahead would be dangerous, and there were many unknowns. But for the first time in years, Eli felt the spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. As they left the workshop, Eli couldn't help but feel that the weight of the galaxy was pressing down on them, and he knew that whatever happened next, it would change everything. The morning sun was barely visible as Eli and Lila rode out from Cactus Ridge. The small town faded into the distance behind them, replaced by the open, endless horizon of the desert. The air was dry, the dust swirling around them as they pushed forward, heading toward the mountains where the first member of the Seven was believed to be hiding. The journey was quiet at first. Lila rode ahead, her posture rigid and focused, as if every mile was a step towards something she had been preparing for her entire life. Eli kept close behind her, his thoughts heavy with the weight of their mission. He had never been one for grand adventures, but this felt different. He wasn't just protecting his town anymore. He was involved in something much bigger than he could have imagined. "What's his name?" Eli asked after a long silence, breaking the stillness that had hung between them. Lila turned her head slightly, her voice soft but filled with purpose. "His name is Cade. Cade Greystone. He was a soldier, a fighter. He's the best tracker I know. If anyone can help us find the rest of the Seven, it's him." Eli nodded, remembering what little Lila had shared about Cade the night before. He had fought in the war against the corporation, a war that had cost him everything. After the final battle, Cade disappeared into the mountains, vanishing without a trace. He was the first on Lila's father's list, the first person they needed to find if they were to have any hope of stopping the corporation. As they continued their journey, the landscape began to change. The flat plains of Cactus Ridge were replaced by jagged hills and sharp cliffs. The heat of the desert was still oppressive, but the mountains offered a sense of isolation, a place where someone like Cade might choose to hide. Eli could feel the tension in the air, both from the environment and from Lila. She had said so little about the past few years, but Eli knew there was more to her than met the eye. After a long day of riding, they made camp near a small stream. The sky was clear, the stars scattered across the black canvas like diamonds. Eli sat by the fire, his eyes scanning the horizon. He didn't know if they were being followed or if they were safe for the night. But something about the way Lila had spoken about Cade made him uneasy. She was confident, but there was a quiet fear behind her eyes that she hadn't shared with him yet. "What happened between you and Cade?" Eli asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Lila looked up from the fire, her expression unreadable. "We were once close, very close," she said, her voice distant. "But when the war ended, things changed. Cade, he blamed himself for what happened. He thought he could have done more, that he could have saved the others. And when everything fell apart, he disappeared. I didn't know where he went, and I didn't know if he was alive or dead. But now I have to find him." Allie nodded, understanding the weight of regret. He'd seen it in people before, that feeling that if they had just made one different choice, everything would have turned out differently. But he also knew that regret could be a powerful motivator. Cade might have been lost to himself, but there was still a chance to bring him back, to help him find his purpose again. "I'll help you find him, Lila," Eli said quietly. "I'll help you bring him back." Leela gave him a small, grateful smile, but there was still a shadow in her eyes. "I don't know what I would do without you." The next morning, they continued their journey, the mountains growing closer with each passing hour. As the sun rose higher, the temperature began to rise as well. The land was harsh, unforgiving, but Eli and Lila pushed forward, determined to find Cade. By midday, they reached the foot of the mountains. The land here was rough, the ground uneven and scattered with rocks. Eli could feel the weight of the journey beginning to take its toll. He had ridden for days without rest, and his body ached from the constant motion. But there was no turning back now. Cade was out there somewhere, and they needed him. Lila led the way, her eyes scanning the terrain with practiced precision. She moved like someone who had spent years in the wilderness, someone who knew how to survive. Eli admired her determination, but he also knew that they couldn't keep this up forever. The days were getting longer, and the threat of the corporation loomed over them. They couldn't afford to waste time. As they approached a narrow pass, Lila held up her hand, signaling for Eli to stop. She dismounted her horse and crouched down, her fingers tracing something in the dirt. Eli followed suit, dismounting and walking over to her. "What is it?" he asked. Lila's eyes narrowed as she studied the ground. "Cade's tracks. He's been here." "Recently?" Eli felt a surge of hope. They were getting closer. They followed the tracks up the mountain, winding their way through the narrow pass. The air grew thinner, and the rocky landscape became even more treacherous. But Lila led the way with confidence, her eyes sharp as she navigated the rugged terrain. Eli followed behind, keeping a careful eye on their surroundings. As they reached the top of the pass, they saw a small cabin tucked into the side of the mountain. Smoke curled from the chimney, a sign that someone was home. Lila's heart skipped a beat. This was it. Cade was here. They approached the cabin cautiously, keeping their voices low. Lila knocked on the door, her hand trembling slightly. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a tall figure standing in the doorway. The man was older than Eli expected, his face weathered by time and regret. But there was something about him that still held strength, something that reminded Eli of the warrior he had once been. Cade Greystone looked at Lila for a long moment before speaking. "I thought I'd never see you again," he said, his voice rough and tired. "What brings you here, Lila?" "I need you, Cade. We need you. The corporation is still out there, and we can't stop them without you. You're part of this, part of the Seven. It's not too late." Cade looked away, his jaw tightening as he turned back into the cabin. "I'm not part of anything anymore," he muttered, the door slowly closing behind him. Lila stepped forward, but Eli placed a hand on her shoulder, stopping her. "Let him think about it," he said quietly. "We've come this far. We can give him time." Lila nodded, a look of deep sadness in her eyes. "I hope he comes around. I really do." They stood there for a moment, watching the cabin in silence. Eli knew the journey wasn't over. They had found Cade, but now they had to convince him to join their fight, and time was running out. The wind had picked up in the mountains, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth. Cade's cabin was quiet, the only sound being the distant call of a bird of prey circling high above. Lila, Eli, and Cade stood at the threshold of the cabin, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. Lila's heart was racing, her eyes locked on Cade as he stood with his back to her, staring into the dimly lit room. Eli watched them both, feeling like an outsider in a conversation he didn't fully understand, but he knew one thing for sure. They needed Cade. They needed him to finish what they had started, to bring together the remaining members of the Seven and to stand against the corporation that had caused so much suffering. Lila took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "Cade, we can't do this without you." Cade didn't move, his hands clenched at his sides. "You don't understand, Lila," he said, his voice rough. "I've lost too much. I've seen too many people die. I thought I could make a difference, but in the end, it was all for nothing. The others are gone, and now you're here, asking me to fight again. I'm not that man anymore." "You are that man, Cade. You always have been. The Seven aren't just names on a list. We're a family, a group of people who believed in something bigger than ourselves. We can't let the corporation win. If we don't stand together now, everything my father worked for, Everything we've all fought for will be lost. Cade finally turned to face her, his eyes dark with regret. I failed, Lila. I failed everyone. I can't carry that burden anymore. Eli stepped forward, his boots crunching on the dirt floor of the cabin. You don't have to carry it alone, Cade. We're all in this together. The people who hurt you, who hurt all of us, they're still out there, and they're getting stronger every day. They won't stop until they have what they want. Cade's gaze shifted to Eli, and for a moment Eli thought he saw a flicker of recognition in the other man's eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give him hope. You think I don't know that? Cade said, his voice tight. I've been running from them for years. Hiding. Waiting for them to come for me. But they'll never stop. They'll keep coming until they have everything. Lila took another step forward, her eyes full of determination. Then we make them stop. We don't hide anymore, Cade. We fight. Cade's shoulders slumped, and he sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know if I'm ready for that. I don't know if I can fight again. Lila reached out and placed a hand on his arm. We don't have to fight alone. You don't have to do this by yourself. We need you, Cade. You're the last piece, the last part of the 7. We can't finish this without you. For a long moment there was silence. Cade's eyes flicked between Lila and Eli, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. Finally, with a slow, reluctant nod, he spoke. All right, I'll help you. But we're doing this my way. Lila's face lit up with relief, and she stepped forward, wrapping her arms around Cade. Thank you, she whispered. Eli watched them, a small smile tugging at his lips. He had known it wouldn't be easy, but they had done it. They had brought Cade back into the fold. The 7 were one step closer to being whole again. The next few days were a blur of preparations. Cade led them through the rugged terrain, his knowledge of the mountains invaluable. Together they worked on gathering supplies and planning their next move, but every step they took was weighed down by the knowledge that the corporation was not far behind, its reach stretching farther than they could imagine. Late one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Cade turned to Lila and Eli. It's time, he said, his voice calm but resolute. We're going after them. Lila nodded, her face hard with determination. We'll need to move fast. We can't let them get the upper hand. How do we get in? He asked. The corporation is likely to be well guarded. Cade smiled, a glimmer of the old fighter showing in his eyes. We don't get in. We go through them. That was all Eli needed to hear. He was ready. The 3 of them set out under the cover of darkness, traveling through the night toward the corporation's stronghold. The plan was simple. Get in, find the weapon, and destroy it before it could be used against the galaxy. It wouldn't be easy, but it was their only shot. As they approached the compound, the sound of their horses' hooves was drowned out by the buzzing of energy shields and the mechanical hum of the corporation's security systems. The compound was heavily fortified, but Cade had a plan. They would take out the outer perimeter first, using the cover of darkness to get as close as possible. They moved swiftly, taking out guards quietly and efficiently. Cade and Lila were a deadly team, moving like shadows in the night. Eli did his part, using his sharpshooting skills to take out anyone who got too close. The farther they went, the more intense the security became. But they pressed on, determined to finish what they had started. Finally, they reached the heart of the compound. The weapon was in sight, locked away in a high-tech vault surrounded by layers of security. Lila moved to the control panel, her fingers flying across the keys as she bypassed the locks. This is it, she said, her voice tense. We have one shot. Eli stood guard, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of trouble. The countdown had begun, and there was no turning back now. The corporation's enforcers would be on them any moment. Just as Lila unlocked the final door, a voice echoed through the compound speakers. You think you could stop us? The voice said, cold and calculating. You're too late. The ground shook as alarms blared. Eli's heart raced as the doors to the vault slid open. But before they could make their move, the sound of heavy footsteps filled the hallway. The corporation was coming. Lila grabbed the weapon, a sleek, glowing device, and held it up. It's time to end this, she said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. Eli drew his gun, ready to defend their lives and their mission. The battle was about to begin.